The thermometer outside Alara Vinton's mountain retreat hadn't climbed above 0 degrees Fahrenheit for weeks. That winter was shattering every record in the isolated wilds of Montana, transforming the terrain into a merciless frozen expanse that pushed every living being to its breaking point. From her timber cabin, tucked amid soaring pines, Alara observed as even the toughest wildlife battled to endure the savage cold snap. At 43, Alara had embraced this solitary existence in the mountains after inheriting her grandfather's property years ago. The modest log cabin, located 20 miles from the nearest town of Thorn Hollow, gave her the tranquility she'd always sought. Her job as a remote software developer granted her the liberty to live where others might falter, surrounded only by wilderness and the animals that roamed these peaks. This morning, like every other in this brutal season, Alara bundled herself in her grandfather's old wool sweater and started her daily routine. The coffee maker hummed in the kitchen as she tossed extra logs onto the snapping fireplace, her only heat source since ice storms had ravaged the power lines. Through her frost-laced windows, she spotted the usual visitors to her land. 3 deer digging through the snow for the feed she'd scattered the night before, and a cluster of blue jays perched near the heated birdbath she kept running. Alara had always felt a profound bond with the wildlife around her home. Unlike many neighbors who saw the animals as pests or threats, she viewed them as cohabitants of this rugged yet stunning landscape. She maintained detailed journals of their habits, tracking how they coped with the harsh conditions. This winter, though, was unlike any other. Even the most durable creatures showed signs of desperation. The afternoon sun stretched long shadows over the snow-draped ground as Alara finished her workday. The temperature had plummeted further, and the wind wailed through the trees, crafting an eerie chorus of groaning branches and whistling blasts. Then she noticed something odd. The deer, usually serene while foraging, suddenly raised their heads together, ears flicking anxiously. Alara edged closer to the window, her breath clouding the glass as she tried to pinpoint what had alarmed them. The birds fell silent, an unusual stillness that made her neck prickle. In her years here, she'd learned to interpret these cues. When the forest hushed, it often signaled something big was stirring. As dusk crept over the land, Alara heard it. A sound unlike anything she'd encountered before reverberated through the valley. It wasn't the familiar hoot of an owl or a wolf's howl. This was different, a deep, aching groan that carried a note of despair. The noise repeated, nearer now. Alara's pulse quickened as she realized whatever made that sound was approaching her cabin. She double-checked her door locks, a reflex honed from years of living alone in the wild. The emergency radio on her kitchen counter hissed with static, a reminder that contact with the outside was scarce in these conditions. Peering from window to window, Alara scanned the tree line with mounting unease. Snow fell again, thick flakes swirling in her porch light's glow, shrinking visibility to mere feet. The moaning sounded once more, closer still, paired with what seemed like heavy steps crunching through deep snow. Alara grabbed her grandfather's old binoculars, hoping to cut through the growing dark and whirling flakes. Movement snagged her gaze at the edge of the lit area. Something massive emerged from the shadows. Her breath hitched as a huge shape trudged slowly through the snowy veil, its form sharpening with each strained step. Alara's grip tightened on the binoculars as recognition sank in. What she saw seemed impossible. Yet there it was, hauling itself through the mounting snow toward her cabin. A full-grown grizzly bear, its fur iced over, moving with clear distress in the bitter cold of a winter night when it should have been hibernating. Little did Alara know, this moment would spark an extraordinary encounter that would upend everything she thought she understood about these mighty beasts and stretch her compassion in ways she'd never foreseen. She pressed against the chilly window, heart pounding, watching the enormous grizzly lumber nearer. Years of wilderness living had taught her bears should be deep in hibernation during these icy months. Yet here one was, plowing through knee-deep snow with obvious struggle. Its powerful frame looked unusually frail, its gait unsteady. The bear's fur, typically thick and plush, was matted with ice crystals glinting in her porch's faint light. Each breath from its snout puffed steam into the frigid air. Alara could now see it left a trail of blood in the pristine snow, small red drops tracing its path to her cabin. As it drew closer, she better gauged its state. Its movements were sluggish, far from the fluid strength these predators usually exuded. Ice clung to its belly fur from dragging through drifts, and its eyes, normally sharp and fierce, were dulled with pain. The bear's right front paw hovered slightly off the ground, explaining its uneven stride. Alara's mind raced through her knowledge of bear behavior. This was unheard of. Bears might briefly rouse in winter if their dens were disturbed, but they never sought humans. Yet this one was steadily heading straight for her porch, as if driven by some primal need. When the bear reached her porch steps, it did something that made Alara question her senses. Instead of showing aggression or trying to force entry, reactions she'd expect from a desperate animal, it slowly sat down in the snow. The motion felt almost intentional, like a dog at its master's door. Then came a sound that would linger with her for years. A deep, rumbling whine so steeped in suffering it tightened her chest with unexpected feeling. The bear lifted its injured paw slightly, and in the porch light Alara saw the issue. The paw was encased in ice, swollen to nearly double its size. Frostbite. The realization struck her hard. This mighty creature was freezing to death and, against all instinct, had sought human aid. Alara's fear clashed with her empathy. Every survival guide, expert, and ranger would urge her to stay inside, call for help, wait for pros. But as she reached for her phone, she recalled the ice storms had killed cell service days ago. The emergency radio crackled uselessly, and the nearest wildlife team was hours off, if they could even navigate the treacherous roads. The bear made that sound again, a blend of whine and moan that seemed to rattle her cabin's walls. It lowered its head, still sitting, and Alara saw something astonishing. The bear's demeanor defied all she knew of these predators. No aggression, no restlessness, just pure exhaustion and pain. Snow kept falling, thickening the ice in its fur. She watched, awestruck, as it placed its uninjured paw gently on her bottom porch step. Not clawing, just resting it there, as if striving to seem harmless. Its eyes, though pained, locked on her window with an almost human-like awareness that stole her breath. Time froze as Alara wrestled with the toughest choice of her life. Wildlife safety rules screamed to stay put, yet her grasp of compassion and survival in these harsh mountains tugged her the other way. The bear's labored breaths clouded the icy air, each one weaker. Alara knew with growing certainty that without action, this magnificent creature would perish on her porch tonight. The cold was still dropping, and in its state, the bear couldn't last until help arrived. Its desperate bid for human aid would end in tragedy unless she acted, something her rational mind deemed insane. As if sensing her turmoil, the bear let out another faint whine, softer and feebler, its head drooping as strength visibly ebbed from its huge frame. In that instant, Alara knew she couldn't just watch it die. She'd have to help, though she had no clue how to do so safely. With shaky hands, she grabbed her grandfather's old winter coat, her mind already churning through plans. She was either about to make a colossal error or step into something truly remarkable. Either way, this night would change everything. The heft of her grandfather's coat felt grounding on her shoulders as she stood in her kitchen, mind racing through options. Her hands shook slightly as she gathered supplies, thick blankets, her emergency medical kit, and the strong flashlight she kept for outages. The bear's ragged breathing seeped through the cabin walls, each exhale fainter in the biting cold. Through the kitchen window, Alara saw its condition worsening fast. Ice crusted thickly around its eyes, and its massive body shivered uncontrollably. The injured paw, still lifted, had turned bluish, severe frostbite. Without swift aid, the damage would be permanent if it survived at all. Alara's wilderness first aid skills kicked in as she assessed things. Frostbite needed slow warming to limit tissue harm. The bear had lost serious heat, evident in its violent trembling. Its disrupted hibernation left it exposed to the brutal cold, signs not just of distress but of looming death. Logic listed all the reasons this was a bad idea. Grizzly bears were among North America's deadliest predators. Even injured, one swipe could kill. Every safety guide warned against nearing hurt animals, especially apex ones. They grew erratic, dangerous, desperate. But as Alara watched, the bear did something that upended all she knew of wildlife. It rested its huge head on its uninjured paw, keeping that odd, almost tame pose. Its eyes, though pained, stayed fixed on her window with an intelligence that seemed to bridge the human-animal divide. It wasn't acting predatory but like a creature seeking refuge. Alara's hands moved to her grandfather's journal on the kitchen shelf. He'd lived here 40 years, chronicling countless wildlife encounters. She'd never read of behavior like this, yet his final entry lingered. Nature's greatest mysteries often come disguised as moments of choice. Trust your instincts, but more importantly, trust your heart. The bear's whimper sliced through her thoughts, fainter now, barely audible over the howling wind. Its breathing grew shallow, its chest hardly rising. The snow around it no longer melted, its body heat was crashing. Without action, it wouldn't survive the night. Alara shut her eyes, took a deep breath, and decided. If she was helping, it had to be now, before the cold claimed another life in this relentless winter. She formed a quick plan, knowing she'd get one shot to do it right. The garage beside her cabin could be a sheltered spot, warm enough to halt further freezing, secure enough to shield her if the bear's mood shifted. With calm purpose, Alara gathered more supplies, honey from her pantry, leftover stew, and gallons of warm water. Her hands steadied, fear yielding to focus. She thought of how she'd seen this mountain's creatures support each other, how even different species sometimes united to endure tough winters. Maybe this was nature teaching her another lesson about survival and kindness. She donned her warmest boots and took her grandfather's walking stick, more for comfort than defense. If the bear turned hostile, nothing she held would matter. This would hinge on trust, mutual trust. As she gripped the door handle, she whispered a quiet prayer to whatever had led this creature to her. The thermometer by the door read 30 below zero. As Alara turned the knob, the bear's eyes followed her. But it didn't lift its head or bare teeth. Its breaths were so shallow they barely misted the air. Time was slipping away. With slow, deliberate steps, Alara opened the door and stepped onto her porch, heart thumping but mind clear. In this moment, she wasn't just choosing to aid an injured animal. She was opting to trust something inexplicable, something that defied reason but demanded action. The porch boards creaked under Alara's feet as she took her first cautious step toward the bear. The snowfall had eased to soft flurries, casting an almost otherworldly quiet, broken only by the bear's strained breaths. Alara kept her movements gentle, speaking in a low, steady murmur to signal her presence. "Easy there, big one. I'm going to help you, but we need to trust each other." Her voice, though quivering slightly, held firm. The bear's eyes tracked her, but its body stayed still, keeping that strange seated stance despite her nearness. Each breath formed a smaller steam cloud, a clear sign of its waning strength. Alara paused about 10 feet away, giving it space while she studied it stayed up close. The frostbitten paw was worse than she'd thought. Ice had wedged between the pads and around the claws, forming a crystalline shell that must have been excruciating. Its fur, usually a thick shield, was matted with ice along its belly and legs, peeling off in frozen chunks that bared its skin to the cold. Moving slowly, Alara set down the warm stew she'd brought. Its rich scent wafted through the air, and the bear's nostrils twitched, the first real spark of interest since she'd stepped out. She nudged the bowl closer with her grandfather's stick, keeping a safe gap. The bear glanced at the food, then back at Alara, unmoving. Instead, it raised its injured paw slightly, as if highlighting its pressing need. The gesture was so intentional, so communicative, that a shiver ran through Alara, unrelated to the chill. "Your paw first, then food," Alara said softly, reaching for the warm water. "We need to warm you up gradually." She poured some into a shallow basin, testing it with her fingers to ensure it wasn't too hot. Sudden heat could worsen frostbite. The next moments would decide everything. Alara had to get closer, touch the bear, against every survival instinct she had. She kept talking, her quiet voice a steady hum in the still night as she inched forward with the basin. When she was within arm's reach, the bear did something extraordinary. It slowly, carefully stretched its injured paw toward her. The motion was so gentle it brought tears to Alara's eyes. The trust it showed was beyond anything she'd known with a wild animal. With trembling hands, she placed the basin beneath the paw. "This might hurt at first," she warned, voice a whisper. She began pouring warm water over the frozen paw, watching the ice melt. The bear flinched but held steady, its dark eyes locked on Alara's face. As the ice thawed, she saw the damage. Severe swelling, discolored skin beneath the fur. But when she gently checked for a pulse in the pad, she found one. The tissue was cold but alive. With care, the bear might keep the paw. The garage door groaned open with her remote, and the bear watched it rise, head tilting slightly at the sound. Alara had prepped the space with thick blankets and secured any hazards. "Come on," she urged, standing slowly and motioning toward the garage. "It's warm in there." She took a few steps, then waited, holding her breath. The bear eyed the door, then Alara, then the door again. With agonizing slowness, it rose, swaying from exhaustion. Alara's heart raced as the huge creature moved, even weakened. Its size was daunting, but its pace stayed deliberate as it limped toward the garage, leaving a trail of melting ice. It paused at the threshold, sniffing cautiously. Inside, the propane heater had raised the temperature significantly. Sensing the warmth, the bear stepped forward. Alara watched, stunned, as this apex predator willingly entered her shelter, trusting her in a way that defied logic. It settled onto the blankets with a deep sigh, as if shedding months of weariness. Alara half-closed the garage door, balancing warmth with fresh air, and set the stew within reach. The hardest part was done. Now the real work of healing began. The first week was critical in the bear's recovery. Alara turned her garage into a makeshift wildlife hospital, keeping it warm with space heaters while ensuring ventilation. She tracked every change in the bear's condition with a medic's precision, noting its slow progress in detailed logs. The frostbitten paw demanded the most care. Hours spent warming the tissue with lukewarm water, applying salves, and wrapping it in soft bandages. What struck her most was the bear's patience. It would extend its huge paw without prompting, staying still as she worked, watching her with intelligent eyes that seemed to grasp her every word. On the third day, Alara reached Dr. Torrin Calder, the regional wildlife vet, via her emergency radio. His initial reaction was disbelief, then worry for her safety. But when she detailed the bear's odd behavior and cooperation, his curiosity took over. "I'm documenting everything," Dr. Calder said on his first visit, voice awed as he watched Alara change the bandages. The bear stayed calm during his exam, showing none of the hostility he'd expected in 30 years of wildlife work. "I've never seen anything like this. This bear's behavior contradicts all we know about grizzlies." Alara learned the bear was female, about 6 years old, likely roused from hibernation when melting snow flooded her den. Dr. Calder guessed she'd roamed for days in the cold before finding Alara's cabin, explaining her dire state. Her seeking human help was unprecedented. As weeks passed, a remarkable bond grew between Alara and the bear. She named her Nova, after the bright star that shone the night they met. Nova showed a near-dog-like fondness for Alara, greeting her with soft breaths each morning when she entered the garage. She'd wait patiently for meals, take medicine and honey without fuss, and let Alara check her healing paw without a hint of aggression. "The implications are staggering," Dr. Calder remarked during a visit. "It challenges what we know about bear intelligence and trust. Nova isn't just tolerating you, she's seeking connection. She sees you as her healer." Healing had its struggles. Some nights, Nova's pain overwhelmed her, her whimpers tearing at Alara's heart. During these, Alara would sit nearby, speaking softly and reading from her grandfather's journal until Nova slept. By month's end, Nova's paw had healed enough to bear weight. Alara began short walks around the garage, supporting Nova's bulk when needed. The sight of this small woman aiding a grizzly's recovery amazed Dr. Calder and the few experts he'd cautiously brought in. "We're witnessing something extraordinary," one researcher noted, watching Nova take treats from Alara's hand. This could reshape wildlife rehab and human-animal bonds. The trust here goes beyond conditioning or survival. As spring neared, Nova's strength returned. Her fur regrew where frostbite had struck, her movements smoother. But the biggest change was in her eyes. The pain and desperation of their first meeting replaced by calm intelligence, and what Alara felt was affection. Dr. Calder helped document Nova's recovery, creating records for a groundbreaking study. The garage door stayed open more, letting Nova feel the warming air. Yet she didn't rush to leave. She knows she's not fully healed, Alara told Dr. Calder one evening as they watched Nova test her paw. She'll go when she's ready. Their bond deepened into something science couldn't fully explain. A tie of mutual trust and respect. Nova's recovery healed Alara too, turning her sought solitude into a richer connection with nature. Each day revealed more about bear behavior, intelligence, and cross-species trust. As winter eased, Nova grew stronger, more confident. She'd stand at the garage entrance, watching the forest awaken, but always returned to Alara's side. Dr. Calder marveled at their bond, documenting a case that would become a landmark in wildlife rehab. The day Nova finally walked into the woods was bittersweet. Alara stood at the garage, watching her healthy form vanish among the pines. Her heart ached, yet she knew this was their goal. Nova paused at the forest's edge, looked back at Alara, then slipped away. But their story didn't end. 3 days later, as Alara sipped coffee on her porch, a familiar shape emerged. Nova returned, carrying a honeycomb dripping with wild honey. She placed it at the porch steps and sat in her usual spot. Alara laughed through tears, realizing their bond had become an unexpected friendship across species. As spring bloomed into summer, Nova's visits grew regular. Every few days, sometimes lingering in Alara's yard, sometimes just stopping by. Dr. Calder kept documenting, amazed at Nova's balance of wildness and connection with Alara. She ignored other human sights, foraged naturally, and acted like a typical grizzly except with Alara. Their tale spread locally, shifting views on wildlife. Schools asked Alara to share her story, teaching kids respect and conservation. She showed them photos and videos of Nova's recovery, proving even fierce creatures deserved compassion. It's not about taming them, she'd tell rapt listeners. It's about sharing this world, and sometimes, if we're lucky, seeing how remarkable they are. Her grandfather's journal became a teaching tool, showing how respectful coexistence with nature yielded wonders. Alara's experience birthed the Peak Wildlife Guardians, a program to aid injured animals and educate about harmony with nature. Dr. Calder helped set up facilities and protocols, ensuring safe aid beyond Nova's unique case. Local rangers, once doubtful, became allies, consulting Alara on wildlife matters. Her approach, shaped by Nova, favored understanding over fear. Through summer and fall, Nova kept visiting, sharing finds like stones, pine cones, or berry-laden branches. Each visit reinforced their rare bond. She stayed wild, but their trust bridged their worlds. As winter loomed, Nova's visits tapered, nature calling her to hibernate. Before vanishing, she made one last stop, sitting and watching Alara with those once desperate eyes. Alara sat on her steps, keeping their respectful distance. "Stay safe this winter," she said softly. Nova huffed gently, a sound Alara knew as recognition. Their story's impact stretched beyond their mountain. Research papers on their bond challenged wildlife rehab norms and human-animal ties. The Peak Wildlife Guardians became a model for communities near wildlife, fostering understanding over fear. As Nova vanished for her winter sleep, Alara reflected on how one desperate night had changed all. Her grandfather's last words rang true. Nature's mysteries came as choices. Choosing to help a suffering creature, against all logic, had saved Nova and unveiled a profound new view of wildlife. Even if Nova never returned, their tale would shape how people saw nature ties. One act of compassion had rippled outward, teaching trust, respect, and the extraordinary links possible between all beings. The frozen bear who'd pleaded at her door that night hadn't just survived. It had helped Alara find her purpose. Together, They'd shown the world that the grandest tales often start with trust between unlikely friends. If you loved Alara and Nova's remarkable friendship, subscribe for more wildlife wonders. Hit the bell for heartwarming animal tales that reshape our view of nature. Share this with those who believe in compassion's power and the incredible bonds between humans and wildlife.